I recently did a video on the best legends for every weapon, so now, naturally it's time for the worst legends as well. Please don't let this discourage you from playing whoever you want though. Keep in mind that Sandstorm won a major tournament on Magyar, who was considered the worst legend at that time. So this shouldn't be taken too seriously, and my best advice to you will always be to play who you love, and the #1 priority is to have fun. Having said that, for Axe, I'm gonna have to go with Azoth, and surprisingly, there were a couple of options I could have went with. Ultimately, I chose Azoth because, although both of his weapons are in a decent spot, I thought together as a weapon comp, they don't do as well. Azoth's signatures aren't bad by any means, but there's none I'd consider to be standout sigs, and his stats aren't terrible either. But surely there must be a reason he's the least played Axe and one of the least played legends in the whole game, right? I could have chose Brawlhalla for her low defense, but I figured being the only Axe legend in the bottom 10 was justification enough to put him as the worst. Now, as you guys may know, I'm quite the Gauntlets glazer, but let's be real for a second. Are there truly any bad Gauntlets legends right now? I really don't think so, but if I had to pick which one has the least overall representation in tournaments, I'd have to pick Core. This should be obvious by now, as I've basically said it for Azoth too. But being the worst legend in a certain category doesn't necessarily make it a bad legend automatically, and I feel the same way for Core. Next is Orb, and I'm going with Thor. I haven't seen a good Thor in ages, and honestly, now that I think about it, I haven't seen any Thor players at all for quite a while. Thor had his moment at the top around 2020 or so, and hasn't really been able to claw his way back into the meta. And honestly, I'm really not sure why. This is another textbook example of a legend that isn't inherently bad, but every other Orb legend simply overshadows him with better weapon comps, stats, and sigs. For Spear, I went with every Silver's favorite or least favorite legend, depending on whether they're fighting with or against her, Queen Nai. Like everyone else so far, she still has a lot going for her. She has crazy force and knockout potential, she has high defense and high strength, which are both pretty meta, she has annoying sigs to deal with, and I mean, she has Spear, which is arguably one of the 3 easiest weapons depending on who you ask. I hate to be a broken record, but she's another character that isn't bad, just what I'd consider the worst. And you could definitely make an argument for Ada instead, and I wouldn't even be mad. But my bias is showing a little since I have her at level 75 myself. Now, I had really high expectations for this next one on release to be the next big Taros, but for Hammer, I have to go with King Zuva. I recently started playing him here and there in my shorts, and a lot of you pointed out that I really shouldn't bother as he's very low tier, but honestly I just play for clips, and ever since I got into Hammer earlier this year, I've been alternating between them all, and Battle Boots is one of the few weapons left that I haven't properly clip farmed with. King Zuva recently received a couple of buffs to his Battle Boots sigs, but I don't think it's enough to really shift him in the meta, and he'll probably remain one of the least played legends in the game overall, with Priya, who came out after him, already having 7 times the amount of level 100 Zuva has. For Sword, I couldn't think of anyone worse than Ezio right now, and that's reflected with him being yet another one of the least played legends in the game. This might all change in an upcoming patch when BMG rework a bunch of signatures, and he also got a pretty significant buff to his Orb down sig recently. But realistically, that only brings it in line with other signatures, as it was pretty unusable before. Ezio's main issue overall is his signatures, and the fact that there are a few better options for both Sword and Orb. But like all legends in Brawlhalla, they're only one patch away from being at the top, and anything could happen in the future. For Battle Boots, sadly like half the list could have been put here, but since I'm not doing repeat legends, I ultimately went with Vivi. Like King Zuva, she's basically been thrust to the side ever since her release, and also probably has less level 100s than Priya does, not surprisingly. Blasters just seem to be notoriously hard to balance because they're either at the top or the very bottom, but I'd say they're finally somewhere around the middle. And besides her Blaster's Ensig, there's nothing I'd say is particularly great, more so just annoying to deal with, but that can be said for a lot of signatures. I wouldn't say she's the worst legend in the game, but she's definitely somewhere towards the bottom. Speaking of legends towards the bottom, we have Lance next, and I went with Thea. Her main issue is that she just doesn't know how to kill, and this is mainly due to 2 glaring reasons. She has so many stat points dumped into what some consider almost as useless as Dex is, and the other reason being that her signatures act like light attacks and aren't a reliable alternative either. Now you can maybe see why I put Zuva and Vivi where I put them instead of Thea, because although I think all 3 are objectively bad, I think Thea is the worst out of them. She is still a lot of fun though, and this is coming from someone who doesn't really play either weapon much. Since there's only 2 Chakram legends, and I chose Priya as the best, I'm going to have to choose Ransom as the worst, regardless of what I actually think about him. Although having said that, I find him pretty bad if we're being honest. Ransom wasn't around when Chakram was unbeatable, and most people had already went back to their weapons of choice by the time he was released, so that might influence my decision a little bit also, but I also just don't think his weapon combination works that well. He doesn't have any signatures I'd consider really good, Besides, another one of those side sigs you can just hold down forever, and your character goes effortlessly from one side of the screen to the other. He could just be really slept on and future metas might favor him, but for now, I don't think he has a lot going for him. Next is Canon, and I went with Lin Fei for some of the same reasons I mentioned for Thea. She has a lot of stat points dumped into Dex, which is universally understood as the weakest stat in Brawlhalla. Although Lin Fei is one of the rare cases in which Dex actually is useful, as she unlocks Ground Pound into Dare as an exclusive Katars true combo. Another legend I wouldn't say is necessarily bad, as she still sees some tournament representation, even though it is just one singular pro for the most part. Despite Canon being relatively unplayed, there are way better options such as Onyx, Seven, Zul, and Sidra, to name a few. For Greatsword, I chose Arcadia as the worst. And to be honest, I was debating to put her as the worst spear originally, but since I'm not doing repeat legends, I saved her for this moment instead. Arcadia is a weird one because even though she has the most true combos on any spear and Greatsword legend by far, she still falls short as they all rely on her opponent to walk into them. Both of her down sigs work as trap signatures which force the user into a certain playstyle. And of course, you could say the same for both of Yumiko's down sigs, but she still gets away with being a hyper-aggressive legend regardless, a benefit that Arcadia doesn't have. For Scythe, I'm going with Moonin. You might think my Scythe and Canon choices are weird, but it'll all make sense soon enough, as I'm sure you're questioning why a certain legend isn't here instead. But the other alternative is Moonin, who, like many of these so far, made it into the bottom 10 for play rate. The overall play rate and lack of tournament representation are usually good indicators on their own. But apart from that, Bow seems to be a hit-or-miss weapon when being paired with others, and in my opinion, this one's a miss. Next up for Bow, it had to be the single most underplayed legend in all of Brawlhalla, Vector. Vector, like Moonin, is another one of those legends whose weapons simply don't work well together. His stats are pretty standard, nothing really bad or good there, but his signatures, to be honest, are quite horrendous. Vector definitely deserves more love from players, but before that happens, he needs some more love from the devs. For Katars, it was always going to be 3-strength Loki, which is why Lin Fei had to be for Canon and Moonin for Scythe. Unless you're cheesing people with offstage gimps, which admittedly is one of Loki's strengths, you're going to struggle to KO with him, especially since neither Katars or Scythe have a true kill confirm. Loki has strong signatures, to be honest. The main reason for his weakness would be his weapon comp, since both of his weapons play similar roles of racking up damage, but struggle to KO in the conventional way. For blasters, we have Thatch, which has the opposite problem of staying alive with his 3 defense, and I think he beats out Ada, albeit only slightly, for the worst spot. Thatch, and by extension Ada, also struggle from the inevitable power creep this game has, which is a topic for another video for sure. But to stay on topic, Thatch's signatures are by today's standards pretty basic looking, at least visually that is. Sword side sig is admittedly deceiving with how fast it comes out, but besides that there's nothing to be fearful of. I feel there's some of you who'd make a case for the cannonballs, but nobody's getting hit by those at high level, unless they've ran out of options or some niche scenario like that. Thatch has quite a few signature true combos, so they're not completely useless, but you have to admit this character shows its age a lot more than others do. It's okay if you don't agree with some of these placements. Most people who don't would say, for example, Ezio isn't the worst sword, he's the worst orb, without fully realizing the intention behind my choice. I probably chose the order based on other categories, like the sum of everything together being worse overall, and not exactly stating, this is the worst sword legend, and more so stating, this is the worst legend with a sword. And yes, there's a huge difference. But anyways, what did you think of this list? Do you have any ideas for future videos? If you do, let me know in the comments below, and if you made it this far, comment jelly deals, so I know you're a real one. But until next time, take care and peace, people.